Good afternoon. Great pleasure to be here. And first, my congratulations to the foundation. It's really made of extraordinary people, and they have made great contributions. And in the movie that you just saw, even with a little challenge to the technology, you heard, of course, of the extraordinary work, the extraordinary contributions that they have made. And there's something very real about the foundation, which is the humanity of the people that work there, which is one reason why Hannah and I have enjoyed so much working with them. Not quite 20 years, but close. So great pleasure to be here. Now, I don't know if this is going to be funny or not, but there is a thing called the mystery of consciousness. And I even have light here. I have some notes so that I don't get lost in my story. But I would like to make things as simple as possible. And first begin by acknowledging that for a long, long time, from antiquity, people have been concerned with how their minds work, where their minds come from, and something that has been called by different names, but which is really always conceived as a mystery. And that is, how is it that we know who we are? How is it that we operate from the standpoint of one person? How is it that we're able to act? And how is it that we know about ourselves? And this, through time has been known as the mystery of consciousness. And it's really a mystery that comes from philosophy. It's been treated throughout history by philosophers, but that more recently has been treated by science as well. And especially in the 20th century, it really became a scientific problem. And for the first time, people had a sense that they might understand what consciousness is and how consciousness gets to be. And largely, that conviction, that idea that we could understand consciousness came from the fact that we also began to understand the brain. And it's fairly obvious that the brain must have something to do with consciousness, although I'm here to tell you that it's not just about the brain, and that in fact, when people talk about consciousness as the great mystery that can only be solved when we know everything about the brain, I would say that that's an exaggeration, that's not correct, and I will cut to the chase and tell you that to understand consciousness, we need to understand life, and we need to understand a relationship between the brain, obviously, and the living body, the brain and life. So it's not just about the brain, and I would even say more, it doesn't begin with the brain. But we'll get there. Probably the best way of proceeding is to tell you about some of the terms that we use when we talk about consciousness, and that tend to be confused with consciousness itself. And probably the first one is mind. When very often people think of the word consciousness and think of the word mind at the same time, and they think they are one and the same thing, but they're really not. So when we talk properly about mind, we should be referring to the way in which we manage to produce images in our brain and, of course, in our being, and those images have different sources and different values. They can be visual images. For example, right now in your minds, you have a picture of this stage, you have a picture of me talking, but you also have auditory images that come from my voice and from the sound of the room itself. And one thing that these images have in common in the creation of mind is that they form a sort of procession. There's a continuity of images in time. And so you have this the combination of visual and auditory images, which are certainly the most dominant, and that flow of mind that flows in time is accompanied by a sort of automatic translation, which is a translation in a language. Some of you are actually have earphones that are giving you a translation in whatever language, probably English or French, from what others have been saying in Spanish. And so there's this parallel track. It's almost like subtitles in a movie that are giving you the words that express those images, that translate those images. Now, is this what consciousness is? No, that's not the case. Consciousness is something else, but mind is certainly one of the very important aspects of consciousness, and we'll get to say more in a minute. Then there's something else that is very often confused with consciousness, which is attention. And another term that gets to be confused often is awareness. So you talk about awareness or you talk about attention when you concentrate your mind process on a particular topic. And when you are, for example, right now, you are paying attention to me. And that is the process in mind, although you can have many other things going on at the same time and in parallel. That's the process that you're probably paying the most attention to. You're concentrated in your mind, you're concentrated on me here and what I'm saying. So is that consciousness? No, that's one aspect of the mind process. And what really is consciousness is about something else that is happening in relation to the mind, and that is the ability to connect that mind, to refer that mind to something else that is going on and that we tend to not pay too much attention to, which is our own life. In other words, every second we are living, we are existing, and there's something about that existence which really is the key part to consciousness, and that is being correlated directly with what is going on in your life, in your body. So the main components of this extremely important process are things such as the feeling of your own body temperature, the feeling of your own respiration, the fact that you're breathing, the feeling of your heartbeat, and actually those three aspects, heartbeat, body temperature, and the respiration, those three together constitute what one calls feelings of existence. And it is actually those feelings of existence that constitute the backbone of consciousness. And I use the term feeling, and I want to now reinforce it, to say that the source of consciousness is actually a particular kind of feeling that we call homeostatic feelings. And we call them homeostatic because they are the result of the process of life regulation in full swing. So at every moment that we are alive, we have a way of trying to maintain all the variables of our body functions within a very narrow range, and that range is the homeostatic range. If things are outside of that range, too much or too little, you are not well. And in fact, your life is being threatened. And the beauty of consciousness is that it is really all about life regulation, and it is about the way in which these homeostatic feelings can convey to you that you are, for example, under threat, or that you ought to do certain things, or that actually things are going very well and you ought to enjoy life and explore the world. So just think of the way in which you can understand consciousness is by trying to connect it with life and trying to connect it with life regulation, and realizing that when you have a feeling, for example, of hunger or thirst, or when you have pain, or when you feel very well, you are being told in no uncertain terms, very directly and very consciously, that something in your body is either going very well or not so well. So the way in which we place consciousness right now is a very interesting development in evolution that came when organisms were complex enough and actually had support enough from a nervous system that the organism could send you messages that were conscious messages about what you ought to do or ought not to do. And for example, thirst and hunger are two key things that you're constantly being communicated every day and that orient you in the right direction. And if you have pain, likewise, you're going to have something, an information that something is wrong in your organism, and you're going to be able to do something about it. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the reason why these feelings, homeostatic feelings, appeared was exactly to help the body, the living body, survive. And they had to, the only way they could get to your mind, the only way they could communicate that information in a way that you could understand and could potentially act on, was by being conscious themselves. So if you want to know about the beginning of consciousness, there you have it, is homeostatic feelings. That's the beginning of the process. And think about something else that is, an equally good example. Fever. I mentioned the feeling of body temperature, and that's something that you pay no attention to, except if you go into a room that is very cold and you shiver and you realize that you should not be in that same condition for very long, because that's not going to be good for you. Or if you are ill and you develop an increase in temperature and you have a fever, and again, you know that you can do something about it. So, to make a long story short, homeostatic feelings are the inaugural event of consciousness. That's where it begins. And when you declare that consciousness is a mystery that cannot be solved, or is, as one famous philosopher said, it's a hard problem and we're never going to get to the solution, I would say no, it is a hard problem when you want to understand the details, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about some details, but it is not impossible to approach, and it needs to be approached the right way, and the right way is to recognize that it is homeostatic feelings that first bring this marvel, which is to know something about yourself, to know something about your body, and to be able to act on it. And by the way, if feelings had not been A, conscious, and B, informative, and informative in a way that would transform your lives, they would never have been selected in evolution. They might have come, but they would be gone by now. They would not have been taken and kept all along. They were kept because they were good for us. And they have been doing extraordinary things for our survival. And just one more comment, feelings, homeostatic feelings, are not just about bad things such as fevers and pains and hunger and thirst. They're always also about good things such as well-being, which recommends to you that you go and explore the world. When you have well-being, you feel like you have time to do things that you wouldn't otherwise, and you can find out about others, you can enjoy your life. So feelings not only communicate things that are immediately helpful to keep your life, but they're always also capable of recommending to you that you enjoy the moment and that you discover things. So one way in which we innovate, back to the foundation, is exactly by having good feelings that allow you to explore the world. Otherwise, you couldn't do it. Now, one more point on the great mystery of consciousness. How does this operate? What is it that is so powerful about feelings? Well, what is so powerful is that it allows you, imagine that you have a track of operations in your life which corresponds to the images that you're creating, what constitutes mind, and which I said earlier is not consciousness. How does that become conscious? How does that give you a sense of self? Well, it generates consciousness when you can link that mind with your body. So actually, the great mystery of consciousness is the solution of the mystery of how you, having a mind that is going on continuously, non-stop, unless you fall asleep or are anesthetized, how you connect that mind to your body. And you may think, well, of course, where else? That mind has to be in your body. But that's not so easy. When you think about it without having that knowledge, you realize that your mind could be somewhere else. Maybe your mind would belong in another organism, or maybe it would not belong to you. It would be a process that would be disengaged from your body. Well, consciousness is actually about making sure that what you have in mind is properly connected, properly referred to your own body, to your own life, and therefore allow you the possibility of doing something positive for that life, whether it is in the form of just saving it or enjoying it. So what feelings do is this extraordinary possibility of making a co-reference for the living body and for the mind so that you can operate ideally. And just a couple of comments here. The existence of consciousness is not universal. So not all living beings on Earth have consciousness. And we have, for example, a very strong idea that bacteria, which are very complex organisms with very complex lives that can sense and detect the presence of others and the presence of certain stimuli, and that can resolve problems in their life, that those organisms are not conscious. They can sense, they can detect, but that doesn't mean that they know that they're sensing or detecting. The other, which is very obvious all around us, is plants. Plants have life, have a very complicated life. They have a root system that implants them on the earth. They have exchanges with the world around them. But do they know that they're doing it? No. It doesn't appear that they do. And one thing that you can find in common with this big group of living creatures called plants or bacteria, for example, is that although they can sense and detect, they don't know, and we think they don't know what is going on because they do not have nervous systems. So life is so complex that it allows you to operate in a very, very difficult world and with a very different management of life's parameters, even without a nervous system. But once you have a nervous system, now you can purchase another great possibility, which is the possibility of feeling, of therefore knowing something about your organism in the proper sense, and with that, generating what is the beginning of a sense of self, beginning of a sense of subject. And so subjectivity, the sense of self, those are the great results of consciousness, and they come via feeling, and probably the best way of maintaining a sense of what consciousness is by relating it to the term experience. So try to use the word consciousness as a synonym of experience. And try to avoid the uses of consciousness which we make all the time because we fall in that trap, which is to say, for example, we are now keenly aware of climate change. Climate change is in our consciousness. Well, it isn't. Climate change is in our minds, and a good thing too, but climate change is not in your consciousness. Climate change is in your minds because you are conscious, and therefore your minds can operate in relation to you, but that's a different thing. So, before I put you completely asleep with all this insistence on terms like experience and subjectivity and feelings, let me tell you something about how could this be done, because that's really, it's very nice to make these distinctions, but you really want to know, and that would be solving the problem, the mystery of consciousness. How is it that a living organism such as ours can create consciousness? How is it that these feelings that I just described can make you conscious? How are they managed? And here I go back to something I said at the beginning, which is that for a very considerable time in recent years, consciousness has been considered a problem of neuroscience. It's a problem that should be solved by the brain, because consciousness comes from the brain. And I alerted you immediately for the fact that this is not quite so, and that we need to put the body in the equation, which is obvious once I told you about homeostatic feelings. And so we need to know, how is this made? How is it that we make those homeostatic feelings? And there we have something quite spectacular, which has become clear in recent years, is that the part of the nervous system that deals with feelings is a very different part from the part of the nervous system that deals with external perception. So I'm looking at you in the audience, I'm using my visual system, and my visual system is made of extremely refined, modern, in the true sense, modern neurons. And those neurons are beautifully insulated with a substance called myelin that really makes them work like beautiful wires. It's a beautifully engineered system. So you look at the retina, you look at the visual cortex, and you realize how well engineered and how modern it is. What is very interesting is that when you look at the feeling system, the way in which you get to know about hunger or thirst or pain or pleasure, it uses a very, very different construction, very different elements. There, you're using neurons, in other words, nerve cells that are not well insulated, they have almost no myelin, and that are in parts of the brain that do not have what is known as the blood-brain barrier. And those territories of the nervous system are not properly separated from the rest of the body. So what you get is this incredible disparity, a disparity between the nervous system that allows you to see me and me to see you and you to hear me, which is modern, highly efficient, uses a set of chemical molecules that is very sharp and that allows fast conduction of signals. It really works quite a lot like a good modern computer. And then you have this other system, which is totally archaic, and so archaic that it comes from the beginning of organisms with nervous systems. And that works in a system where you leak electrical current, where you have a completely different set of molecules. So for example, in the system, which we call interoceptive, which allows you to understand what's going on in your body, you actually use molecules such as, for example, serotonin or dopamine. But in the other system, you use molecules such as GABA. And the system that gives us our feelings is not only from old parts of the brain, but from parts of the brain that work slowly and sometimes even inefficiently. Now, here's the good news, is that that's how nervous systems began. So that's good. But the other good news is that leakage, that slowness, and that mixture with the body is what, according to us, is the source of consciousness. It allows, I like the word commingle. For those that are English speaking, this will not be too much of a problem. For the others, I don't know how you're going to translate it. But you have this commingling of what belongs to the body and what belongs to the brain, to the nervous system. And that possibility of joining one with the other is exactly what gives us the possibility of feeling. And you would not have any idea of who you are and where you are and how your body is and how your life is if you didn't have all of this inefficiency and old stuff that comes from this old part of the nervous system. So this also gives you a possibility of thinking that that's how nervous systems began, and that's something that gave the nervous systems the possibility of having a keen knowledge of what was going inside the body and doing something about saving lives and exploring the world. And then when the nervous system also developed remarkable properties in terms of having proper hearing and proper visual system and the possibility of touching and smelling and tasting, then you got the possibility of constructing an image of the world, which is what your mind does, but having that image of the world located, or even better, co-located with your body. So you have to have both. To have the rich mind that we have and to have the knowledge that we build, we need the fast, efficient, modern nervous system. But if you did not have feelings to begin with, you would never know that you had all of these processes now going, and obviously nature took care of the blending of these two. So I think we have a pretty good, strong idea of how this can be made. I think that this is probably now beyond the level of a hypothesis because the evidence is so powerful, but scientists ought to be careful with affirming their hypotheses until they are 100% sure, which really means that some research needs to be done, and that's something that labs such as our lab in Los Angeles and others are involved in, and that research will give us the confirmation of all the projections and hypotheses that we're making along this scenario that I just described. But clearly, all the things that I've told you are real, and the things that I told you make sense in relation to consciousness, and there are many ways in which we could say that the mystery of consciousness is either solved or has a very strong hypothesis that will allow for the solution. And then, of course, there are many other things that can be taken out of this conception. And one of them is that since, of course, we are so concerned, as we should be, with AI, with artificial intelligence, is to say that it's going to be difficult to produce in an artificial mechanism, in an artificial organism, to produce or to reproduce anything quite like this. In other words, there's something quite special about the way in which our consciousness is being built, in the way homeostatic feelings are being built. And just think of this. Homeostatic feelings, as the term implies, are about life regulation, are about how life is going on in your body. So unless you have an artificial system in which you can implement something that looks exactly like life, it's going to be difficult to have anything that looks exactly like our homeostatic feelings. Now, there are many ways of going around this problem, and I will leave it for you to imagine those ways. It's something about which I feel much less optimistic. But of course, you don't need to have artificial organisms, quote unquote, operating like living organisms. They can operate like living organisms, for example, at the level of our extroception, at the level of our general intelligence and memory. That's perfectly fine, and they can be very useful to us. They don't need to have the same properties, all of the same properties that we have. In other words, there's no need for those organisms to be alive, and if they are not alive, it's not likely that they're going to have anything like our consciousness. So, if I spent my time, I have. Am I okay? Can I say 2 more words? So, the 2 more words that I would say is that it's quite interesting how we very often want to accept mystery and maintain mystery, but science was actually created to solve mysteries, and there's no reason why we should not try, even when they appear to be impenetrable, as the mystery of consciousness has seemed to be so very often. So I would say that science can tackle some of these mysteries, and I think in the case of consciousness, we're well on our way to solving that mystery, and maybe in the conversation we're going to have next, we can address some of those additional questions. So thank you very much.